Hello there. Tonight we are curled inside the worst possible bedtime arrangement, a medieval ship driving north under a black sky, with ice forming on the ropes and spray hitting your face like thrown gravel. The deck bucks under your feet. Your cloak is heavy, your fingers are slow, and the wind has very strong opinions about your future. This is the kind of night where sleep is not a comfort. It is a stolen scrap, taken between orders, ropes, and the small private belief that you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you are listening from and what the local time is beside your bed. It is strange and lovely to imagine all these small lamps and dark rooms scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights, because the ship does not care whether you are ready. The sea is already climbing the side again, and the next wash of water comes over the rail with a slap that turns every loose thing into a problem. You stand with one hand hooked around a stay, not because it looks brave, but because standing without holding on is a fine way to become cargo. The ship is a wooden working vessel of the medieval North Atlantic world, the kind of craft that may carry fish, wool, timber, hides, grain, stolen goods, or all of these in some awkward order. Medieval seafarers in many northern regions use clinker-built hulls, with overlapping planks fastened along the sides. The method makes a strong, flexible shell, useful when the sea is punching at it, though useful feels generous while your teeth are clicking together. You are not a pirate in the clean storybook way, with a tidy flag and a private cabin full of candles. In these waters, the difference between trader, raider, hired fighter, outlaw, and desperate opportunist can be thinner than the ice forming in the scuppers. A man who raids today may swear he is recovering a debt tomorrow. Someone else may call it piracy. You, being low enough in the ship's order to get shouted at by nearly everyone, call it cold. The storm makes rank simpler for a while. Whoever keeps hold of a rope is useful. Whoever moves without slipping earns faint respect. Whoever falls asleep in the wrong place becomes an obstacle with a pulse. The deck is coated with water that does not run away fast enough. It gathers under coils of rope and beside barrels lashed down with lines checked again and again. When the ship rolls, the water slides and returns, carrying grit and tiny chips of ice that sting at the ankles. Your first thought is not about sleep. It is about staying warm enough to remain clever. Cold at sea is not one feeling. It is a set of small thefts. The wind takes heat from your face. Wet cloth takes it from your shoulders. The planks take it from your soles. Iron fittings burn cold against skin if a careless finger finds them. Your breath warms the inside of your hood for a moment, then the damp cloth cools against your mouth. Very considerate. Medieval sailors do not need the word hypothermia to know the practical truth. A wet, exhausted body grows stupid, and a stupid body makes mistakes with ropes, footing, and orders. The sail above you is partly reefed, though not neatly enough for anyone's taste. Men move in short bursts. A rope is hauled, a knot is cursed, a yard groans. The steering gear must be tended with care. If the vessel loses the wrong angle to the waves, she can be shoved broadside, and then every man aboard becomes deeply interested in prayer. There is no proper bedtime. There is only the chance that the watch will release you for a while, and that you will find some patch of the ship where the wind cannot strip you down to bone. The word sleep is almost misleading. It means crouching. It means leaning. It means folding your body around a dry corner of yourself, if you still own one. It means trusting that the man beside you will wake when called, and will not steal the better half of a shared cloak. Because apparently, even near death, there are standards to lower. The strangest details are often the most practical. Some northern seafarers use foot wraps or strips of wool and cloth inside their footwear, and those humble wrappings can be shifted, turned, tightened, or dried a little when soaked. Not elegant, not heroic, but a drier fold against the toes may matter more than any speech about courage. In archaeological finds from northern Europe, textiles, leather shoes, and practical bindings remind you that survival often rests on things too ordinary for heroic poems to mention. The saga may remember the raid, your toes remember the wrapping. A wave strikes hard enough to make the hull shudder beneath you. Someone laughs once, sharply, not from amusement, but because the alternative is making a smaller, less useful noise. You lower your head and keep moving, because stillness lets the cold settle into the joints. You help drag a coil clear of freezing water, then pin it with your knee while an older sailor checks the line by touch. He does not waste words. In weather like this, speech becomes a luxury item, and the wind taxes it heavily. The ship's planks smell of tar, salt, old fish, wet rope, and men wearing the same layers too long. The tar matters. Medieval ships in northern seas rely on coatings of tar, pitch, or similar sealants to help preserve and waterproof wood and cordage. The smell gets into sleeves, hair, sacks, and the back of the throat. It is not cosy exactly, but it is a sign that someone has tried to keep the sea outside the ship. Researchers are still split on the question of how often smaller medieval northern vessels carried covered shelters or awnings in rough high-latitude travel. Written sources are uneven, cloth rarely survives, and every ship is changed by need, season, cargo, and owner. Some vessels may have tent-like coverings. Some offer almost nothing but the lee of cargo and the mercy of low boards. Tonight, whatever protection exists is not where you are standing. A loose bucket knocks against a frame until someone kicks it flat. A ship in a storm is full of these little insults. The slap of a line, the scrape of a barrel, the creak of wet wood, the thud of a man dropping to one knee and getting up before anyone can ask whether he is hurt. Some sounds are ordinary. Some mean water has found a new path. Some mean the master's voice is coming, and everyone near you quietly becomes busier. Your own rest, when it comes, will not be announced tenderly. Someone jerks his chin toward the darker part behind stacked goods and tells you to get below or get out of the way. That is the invitation. You accept it with the gratitude of a person who has recently been washed sideways into a barrel. The way below is not a staircase made for dignity. You lower yourself through a slick hatch. Your knee bumps wood. Your shoulder catches on a line. Behind you, the deck tilts again, and for one unpleasant second your body becomes undecided about where the floor is. A hand from below catches your sleeve and pulls hard enough to save you from arriving head first. No one comments on this kindness. The air changes as you descend. The wind drops away, not completely, but enough that your ears ring with its absence. The dark below is thick with stored things and human breath. Water ticks somewhere it should not. A barrel creaks against its lashing. The cold follows you, of course. It comes differently here, less like a blade, more like a damp hand pressed slowly through cloth, while boots cross the deck above and the watch calls out into the weather. The hand lets go of your sleeve once your boots find a place that is at least mostly floor. Mostly is the best anyone can promise. The ship rolls and the darkness rearranges itself by sound. A cask nudges a timber, a sack slumps, a loose wooden bowl slides until someone's foot stops it. Your shoulder remains pressed against a rib of the hull. The plank beside your cheek is cold enough to feel almost wet even where no water touches it. Down here, the ship explains itself through inconvenience. The curving sides mean there is no square corner where a body can neatly belong. The cargo decides where people fit. Barrels take the places that might have been restful. Bundles of hides give a little, but smell strongly of animal and salt. Bales of wool are tempting because they are soft by shipboard standards, which is a very low standard. But the owner of the cargo may object to a soaked sailor making a bed of profit. Even pirates, raiders, and hard-faced men with knives understand that goods can matter more than comfort. A man may steal a cargo and still complain if you wrinkle it. The hull is built to move, not to cradle sleepers. Many medieval northern vessels use overlapping strakes, those clinker-laid planks that make the side look slightly stepped from within. The ribs and fastenings create narrow shelves and awkward shadows. Your hip finds one raised edge, your elbow finds another. The ship does not provide a mattress. It provides a lesson in geometry delivered through bruises. You crouch beside ballast stones tucked low in the vessel. They are not there for romance. They help keep the ship properly weighted and balanced when cargo, sail, wind and sea all try to have different opinions. Stone ballast has been found in many archaeological contexts, and any sailor knows the basic principle without needing a scholar to name it. Weight low down helps the hull behave. Behave is a hopeful word. The stones shift only slightly under their restraints, but that small scrape carries through the boards like someone sharpening a knife in a cupboard. The best place to sleep is never simply the driest place. It is the place where you will not be crushed, soaked, trampled, ordered up too slowly, or accused of damaging something worth more than your coat. Against the hull is colder. Near the centre is safer from sudden water along the seams, but more exposed to feet. Beside cargo is warmer if the cargo is cloth, colder if it is barrels, risky if it leaks. Near the hatch means fresher air and faster orders. Far from the hatch means less wind and more chance of being forgotten until someone needs you and wakes you with a boot. The choices are rich in the sense that a prison menu is rich. A small line is passed down and tied again across a stack. You tuck your knees in while two men adjust it. They speak in grunts and short words because a full sentence is too large for the space. The ship has no interest in personal boundaries. A shoulder presses your back. Someone's wet hem lies across your ankle. A man trying to sit lowers himself onto a coil, misses, and lands partly on your foot. He removes himself without apology. That is apology enough. Medieval ships are often smaller and more open than the later ships people imagine when they hear the word pirate. No grand lower decks, no rows of hammocks, no lantern-lit sleeping quarters arranged with theatrical gloom. In much of the medieval seafaring world, especially on trading and raiding vessels of northern waters, men sleep among cargo, gear, shields, bundles, tools, and each other. Hammocks become common in European naval use much later, influenced in part by Atlantic and Caribbean encounters. Your sleeping arrangement is older and less elegant. Wood, cargo, cloak, luck. The evidence remains frustratingly divided over exactly how sleeping places were arranged on many working vessels, because soft things vanish from the archaeological record, and written sources tend to remember battles, cargoes, saints, lawsuits and storms more readily than a man's damp backside on a plank. A ship burial, a wreck, a law code, a saga, a merchant account, each gives part of the shape, never the whole night. So you live in the gap. You know what the record cannot quite preserve, where a tired body tries to put its knees. A strip of planking above your head has been rubbed smooth by hands. That little polish matters. Men have braced there before, probably in bad weather, probably while pretending not to be afraid. Nearby a wooden chest sits lashed in place. It may hold tools, spare cordage, valuables, or the private clutter that men insist is essential until someone else must climb over it. In some medieval ship finds, storage chests and sea chests show how personal and practical goods travel together. A chest can be a seat, a step, a barrier, a table, and, in desperate conditions, a pillow with corners. You lower yourself beside a pile of rope that smells of salt, tar, and damp fibre. Cordage is useful bedding only if you do not mind waking with its pattern written into your side. Still, it lifts you slightly from the coldest plank. You pull your cloak under one thigh and over the opposite shoulder, making a shape that would shame any tailor but satisfy a freezing sailor. The ship rolls again. Your spine meets the hull. The hull answers with no warmth at all. Somewhere forward, cargo knocks twice. Everyone pauses. Not dramatically, just enough. Cargo that breaks loose can injure a man or punch through other goods, and in a small vessel the difference between stored property and moving hazard is one failed knot. A senior sailor crawls toward the sound with a length of spare line between his teeth. This is how authority appears below deck, not with ceremony, but with someone knowing which knot to trust while everyone else keeps their limbs out of the way. The cramped space teaches your body to sleep defensively. You do not sprawl, you make yourself narrow. One arm guards your ribs from passing boots. One hand stays near a fixed timber, because if the ship lurches hard enough, waking already attached to something may be useful. Your knees draw close, not from modesty, but to keep heat from leaving through the long, open lines of the body. The cold is patient. It waits for gaps. There is a strange little comfort in the ship's motion once the worst of it becomes familiar. Not comfort exactly, more like permission to stop resisting every tilt. The boards rise under you and fall away. The hull creaks in separate voices. One sound belongs to the cargo. One belongs to the mast. One belongs to a seam working against the sea. The old hands know these differences in their sleep or near it. You are learning them the slower way, by flinching at the wrong ones. Above, the storm presses down through the hatch. Below, the vessel's shape presses upward into your bones. Between them, sleep has to be folded thin enough to fit. You edge your shoulder away from the cold plank and tuck one corner of your cloak between your neck and the hull. It slips free almost at once. The man beside you, already half gone into a rough doze, has wedged his cap against a barrel stave with enviable selfish skill. And the next roll of the ship sends your knee into the ballast stones before you can stop it. The knee throbs quietly where it struck stone, a private little bell inside the joint. You do not move at once. Moving means exposing some warmer fold of cloth to the air, and every fold is now part of a negotiation. The cloak under your shoulder has already crept away. Your sleeve is twisted. Your hood has slipped back far enough for cold drops from the hatch edge to land behind one ear, each one finding the same place with spiteful accuracy. Clothing is the first shelter you own, and tonight it is also the shelter that has begun to fail. You wear linen close to the skin because linen is common for underlayers in much of medieval Europe, and wool above it because wool is the great working fabric of the northern world. Wool can still hold some warmth when damp, which is one reason it matters so much in cold regions, but there is a difference between damp and properly soaked. You are moving toward the second category with impressive commitment. The outer layer is thick, heavy, and not cut for graceful sleep. It was made for use, for hauling, bracing, carrying, and standing in weather that would make a sensible person reconsider the whole profession of sailing. The wool scratches at the neck where salt has dried in it from earlier spray. Salt stiffens cloth. It makes cuffs hard and seams unpleasant. When the sleeve bends, it does not bend like something obedient. It folds like a small, damp board. You pull the cuff over your wrist and discover that your fingers have become slow negotiators. They do not quite close when asked. The nails ache. The skin around them feels tight. A man beside you has wrapped extra strips of cloth around his hands. Not gloves exactly, more like proof that the hand is worth saving, if one has the time. Mittens and gloves exist in the medieval world, of course, but shipboard labour often demands fingers free enough for knots and lines. Warmth is excellent until it prevents you from doing the thing that keeps the mast from making a terrible decision. Your footwear is worse. Leather softens, darkens, and drinks from the night. Inside it, the foot wraps have shifted. One heel is bare against a rubbed patch. You work 2 fingers down the side of the shoe and tug the cloth back where it belongs. The movement is small and awkward, but it has the seriousness of a legal settlement. A crease under the foot can become a blister. A wet blister can become an open sore. An open sore at sea is not a poetic problem. It is a filthy, limping, badly timed problem. Some sailors use grease or oil on leather to resist water, and tar or oil can darken the seams of clothing and gear. That does not make anything truly waterproof in the modern sense. It only buys time. The sea is rich in time and spends yours freely. A hood rubbed with grease may shed spray for a while. A leather shoe may resist the first soaking. Then water finds stitching, ankle, gap, lace hole, or the foolish place where you thought the cloth overlapped. The ocean is very patient about tailoring errors. A small packet passes from hand to hand in the dark. It is not treasure, unless your standards have adjusted to the weather, which they have. Inside is a scrap of drier cloth, perhaps kept under someone's inner layer or inside a small bag. A senior man uses it to wipe his fingers before testing a knot that must not slip. Then he tucks it away again. A dry rag can be tool, bandage, tinder wrapping, hand warmer, and private luxury. Nobody laughs at it. On a night like this, a scrap of dryness has social standing. The written sources leave room for disagreement about how widely sailors in these northern medieval waters used waxed or greased outer garments at sea, and how much later evidence should be read backward. Scholars have examples of treated cloth, oiled leather, and waterproofing practices across different periods, but the exact habits of a small raiding crew in a freezing storm refuse to line up neatly for inspection. You do not care what century a future expert will assign to the best version of the idea. You care whether the shoulder seam lets in water. It does. Your belt bites across your middle. Belts are useful. They hold knife, pouch, maybe a small tool, maybe a charm, maybe nothing but the dignity of keeping garments from opening at the worst possible moment. But when you curl tight, the belt presses into the belly and traps wet folds under it. You loosen it one notch. Not too much. Loose clothing catches. Loose gear is borrowed by the ship, and the ship returns very little. There is no single pirate costume here. No bright sash placed for future illustrations. A raider dresses like a working seafarer who has made peace with ugliness. Tunic, hose or leg coverings depending on place and date, cloak, hood, cap, leather shoes, mittens if lucky, patched cloth if not. Colour exists, but storm and salt reduce everything toward the same tired range of dark, faded, stained, and once more expensive than it now looks. A man with better cloth may not look grand below deck. He only looks slightly less doomed around the cuffs. The quirky pride of clothing appears in small repairs. A sleeve patched with different wool, a hood edge reinforced with a strip of old cloth, a shoe thong replaced with cord meant for some other purpose. One man has tucked dried grass or spare fibre inside his footwear for insulation, a trick used in cold climates in different forms because air trapped in dry material can help. It is not charming when it leaks out in little pieces. It does, however, mean his toes may keep better company than yours. Your own cloak has a tear near the lower edge. In calmer weather you might mend it with a needle and thread from a pouch. Sailors carry needles because cloth, sail, leather, and human arrangements all fail. Tonight the tear drinks water. You twist that section inward and trap it under your thigh. This is not elegant tailoring. This is battlefield upholstery performed on yourself. A drop slides from your hairline down into your collar. You bow your head and breathe into the hollow of your chest, warming the linen there for one short moment. The smell is intimate and not flattering. Salt, damp wool, old sweat, tar, and the sour trace of fear that nobody names. Medieval people are not unaware of bad smells. They make jokes, complain, wash when possible, air garments when possible, and endure what cannot be fixed. The idea that everyone simply floats through stench without noticing is one of those modern comforts, like central heating, that tells very flattering lies about us. Someone above shouts. The shout comes down broken by the hatch and the wind. The men around you change shape before the words are clear. A shoulder lifts, a hand reaches for a line. Your half-made sleeping place is no longer yours, because the storm has spoken again, and your clothing, heavy as guilt and twice as damp, must come with you. You tighten the belt, drag the cloak free from under your knee, and feel the cold surface you had warmed vanish, instantly, into the general misery of the ship. The hatch throws a grey-black square above you. One by one, bodies unfold from cargo, rope, and shadow, and the wet wool pulls at every elbow as you climb toward the deck. The first breath above deck arrives like punishment for curiosity. It fills your mouth with cold so quickly that you close your teeth against it, as if that will make any difference. The wind flattens your hood to one side. Spray lifts over the rail and breaks across the men ahead of you, and for a moment, the whole deck seems to be made of moving shoulders, wet rope, and hands grabbing at whatever does not move. Your body wants to curl. The ship requires the opposite. You pull with the others, not in a clean, heroic line, but in a staggered knot of men whose boots keep sliding. The rope runs wet through your palms. It is thick hemp or a similar plant fibre, heavy with water, stiff where the cold has begun to harden it. Medieval cordage is made from natural fibres, and every sailor knows the way wet rope changes character. It swells, drags, freezes, and refuses to pass easily through the hand. A dry rope can be coaxed. A soaked one negotiates like a tax collector. The older sailor beside you does not shout. He leans close, puts his mouth near your ear, and says one word. Together. That is the trick, not strength. Timing. You lean back as the others lean back. The rope moves a little. Your feet slip, catch, slip again. Heat flares in your thighs and shoulders, and for several blessed heartbeats the body makes its own weather. Work warms you faster than any cloak, though it spends you just as fast. Then the pull ends, and the cold returns to collect what it is owed. You tuck your hands under your arms, not for long enough to bring a little feeling back into the fingers before the next order steals them again. Men do this without discussion. Hands go into armpits, into sleeves, under belts, between knees, against another man's back if nobody is feeling too proud. Heat is treated like a small coin that must not be dropped. Nobody has enough. Everyone knows the value. A younger man breathes into the hollow of his cupped hands. A poor plan if the moisture freezes later, but for one moment it helps. Another keeps his wrists tucked inside the edge of his tunic when he is not handling rope. The wrists matter. So does the neck. So do the ankles, which seem unfairly far from the heart on nights like this. You pull your hood tighter and lower your chin until wool scratches your lips. Your own breath warms the cloth, then dampens it, then chills it. A clever arrangement, clearly designed by someone who hates faces. The ship turns slightly under the steering, you bend with it. Behind the mast, several men crouch close in the lee of stacked cargo in a low rail, not resting, not properly, waiting. They press side to side without ceremony, a rough human wall against the wind. Huddling is not sentiment, it is technology. A shared cloak, shared body heat, a shoulder blocking a draft. These are not signs of softness. They are how a crew keeps enough warmth inside its people to keep the ship alive. The mainstream truth is simple and old. In cold conditions, wind and wetness steal heat far faster than cold air alone. Medieval sailors do not measure wind chill, but their bodies understand it. A damp cloak in still air is miserable. A damp cloak in a gale becomes an argument you are losing. So men seek the lee side of a mast, the shadow of cargo, the space behind a shield or bundled sail. Any interruption in the air's clean attack. Someone has wedged a rolled sail low against a few barrels to form a small pocket out of the worst wind. It is not a shelter so much as an insult to the storm, but it works a little. You crouch there when the work pauses, pressing your back to one man and your knee against another's boot. No one asks permission. The body is too busy being practical. The rolled sail smells of tar, salt, and old damp linen. Its edge flickers when the ship pitches. Little beads of water run down it like the sail itself is sweating from the effort of helping. A quirky habit shows itself in the way one sailor has tucked a smooth stone, wrapped in cloth, inside his clothing near the belly. It is not hot now. It may have been warmed earlier near the galley fire, or against another warm surface before the storm worsened. Warm stones are used in many cold households and sick rooms, and at sea a small warmed object can become a private treasure. This one is losing heat, but slowly. He shifts it with a secretive hand when he thinks no one is watching. Of course everyone is watching. Everyone is jealous. Your own trick is smaller. You keep your feet moving inside the shoes without lifting them much from the deck. Toes press, curl, release. Calves tighten, knees flex. It looks like impatience. It is maintenance. Standing still lets the cold enter through the soles and climb. Too much movement wastes strength and risks a fall. So you make the smallest possible labour, a hidden little tread against numbness. The surviving evidence refuses to settle the question of how often medieval seafarers understood these cold weather habits as formal knowledge rather than inherited practice. Did crews teach them as rules? Did boys learn them by being cuffed away from foolish positions? Did everyone simply copy the oldest man still able to feel his fingers? The sources rarely pause to explain such humble intelligence, but on this deck, knowledge does not need a written name. It crouches behind cargo, wraps cloth around a wrist, and steals warmth from the space between two tired bodies. A gust drives spray under your hood. You turn your face toward the shoulder of the man beside you, and he allows it because he has done the same to someone else. The contact is not tender. His cloak smells worse than yours, which is almost impressive, but the wind breaks against him first, and the difference is real. The side of your face stops burning for a few breaths. Small rules govern the huddle. Do not trap another man's arm if you must move fast. Do not sit on a line. Do not let your cloak flap loose into gear. Do not take the inner place too long, unless you are injured, ranked above complaint, or shameless. A man can be cold and still keep account of fairness. Especially cold men keep excellent accounts. The master's voice cuts across the deck. The huddle opens as if pulled by a hook. You push upright, and the warmth you borrowed scatters at once. There is work at the forward line, something iced, jammed, or badly placed. Your hands come out from under your arms, clumsy and reluctant. The fingers are not ready. The ship does not request readiness. You move low, one hand on the rail, one on a rope stretched along the deck. Ice has begun to crust on exposed knots and wooden edges where spray lands and the wind hardens it. Not thick enough to make a shining fairy tale ship, enough to make every grip less trustworthy. A man ahead of you strikes a frozen knot with the handle of a knife, not cutting, only knocking the stiffness loose. The sound is small and sharp, almost domestic, like someone tapping a spoon against a bowl in a very badly located kitchen. The line comes free by degrees. Your hands burn as the blood returns, then sting, then go dull again. Each change feels like news from a distant province. When the order passes to hold, you hold. When it passes to ease, you ease. Nobody wastes a full explanation in the storm. Words become short because bodies are already carrying the rest. The work pulls heat up through your chest once more. Breath comes hard. Your wet wool sticks at the elbows. The wrapped foot inside the shoe slips again, and you know you will have to fix it before trying to sleep, because a folded cloth under the toes will wake you more surely than any bell. The ship drops into a trough, rises, and shakes water from her side. For one moment, the wind shifts enough for the men near the mast to draw closer again, not by order, but by instinct. Shoulder finding shoulder, while the rope stays alive in every hand. The rope stays alive long enough to pull the last useful heat from your shoulders. When it is finally made fast, no one cheers. A man only slaps the knot once with the flat of his hand, as if warning it to behave, and the crew begins to fold itself back toward whatever protection the ship can offer. You descend again with your wrapped foot already complaining, the cloth bunched under the toes like a private accusation. Below the hatch, the air receives you badly. It is warmer by only the smallest mercy, but the difference is enough to make the lungs notice. Wind no longer tears the breath away. Instead, the hold gathers breath, damp wool, bilge water, tar, old fish, and the sour wooden smell of things stored too long in a place that cannot dry. Safety apparently has a flavour, and it is not a good one. The hold is not one clean room. It is a crowded argument between ship shape, cargo, water, and human exhaustion. Barrels crowd the centre where they have been lashed. Sacks are wedged where the curve of the hull allows. Spare rope lies in a coil that has become somebody's claim, though nobody says so aloud. A bundle of hides has been covered with cloth against the worst drips, and the cloth has sagged where water gathers. Each object is both useful and in the way. You crouch and tug at the foot wrap inside your shoe. The leather is stiff with cold and salt. 2 fingers work the cloth free, smooth it, fold it flatter under the ball of the foot. It is ridiculous how much attention a small crease can demand. A king may argue over a border with less focus than you give to this damp strip of wool. When you stand again, the foot still hurts, but now it hurts honestly. Water moves somewhere below the boards. bilge water is a fact of wooden ships. Even a sound vessel takes in some water through seams, spray, rain, wet gear, and ordinary use, and that water gathers in the lowest parts until it can be baled or pumped, depending on the ship and period. Medieval crews know the sound of it. A little slosh is normal. Too much is a different story, and nobody wants that story told tonight. A boy with a wooden scoop and a face too tired for youth crawls toward the low place where the water gathers. He works by touch more than sight, dipping and throwing what he can into a bucket passed behind him. The bucket is not full before it is heavy. The man receiving it spills some on his own leg and mutters the kind of prayer that may not improve his standing with any saint. Still, the bucket moves. This is how survival often looks. Not noble, not dramatic. Just a chain of cold hands moving unwanted water from one place to another. You find a place beside stacked barrels, not because it is comfortable, but because their round sides block some of the movement around you. The barrel hoops press shadows across your knees. A faint smell leaks from one seam, maybe ale, maybe brine, maybe something less encouraging. Ships in these waters carry preserved food and trade goods that announce themselves through smell before they announce themselves through labels. Salt fish, tarred rope, hides, wool, grain if luckier. Each has its own damp breath. The rats are not polite enough to remain legendary. Something scratches behind a sack, pauses, then scratches again. Rats and mice travel with stored food, cordage, bedding, grain, and human carelessness. They are not evidence of failure so much as evidence that food exists. One man flicks a bit of hard crust toward the sound to draw the creature away from a more valuable sack. That may be kindness, strategy, or surrender. At sea, the categories blur. There is a small oddity tied near one beam, a bundle of dried herbs or strong-smelling leaves, flattened and nearly spent. Perhaps someone believes it sweetens the air. Perhaps it keeps insects away from cloth or discourages vermin. Perhaps it once had a better purpose and has been forgotten. Medieval people use fragrant plants in homes, churches, chests, sick rooms, and clothing, though their uses vary by region and habit. Here, in the hold, the bundle gives off almost nothing. It has been defeated by bilge. Specialists still hesitate over whether some descriptions of medieval shipboard cleanliness reflect actual regular practice or the wishful language of regulation, complaint, and hindsight. A rule about keeping a vessel orderly does not mean the vessel smells pleasant in an Arctic storm. An archaeological trace of drainage does not tell you how well a half-frozen crew uses it at midnight. The evidence can show structure. It cannot fully preserve the mood of a man bailing water while another man tries to sleep against a barrel that smells of old herring. The planking beneath you is damp enough to darken your cloak. You shift the cloth before sitting, but there is no dry place, only places that are less ambitious about wetting you. You spread the cloak under one hip and keep the upper fold around your shoulders. The trick is not to waste the cloth by using it all as bedding. A wet plank under the body is bad. A cold back without covering is worse. Every position is a compromise, and the ship keeps revising the terms. Above, boots thud and pause. Below, men sort themselves by habit. The older ones choose quickly, trusting memory and selfishness in equal measure. The younger ones hover too long and lose the better spots. You wedge yourself between a barrel and the curved hull, leaving one hand free. That free hand matters. If the ship pitches hard, if cargo shifts, if someone calls, if water begins sounding wrong, the hand must find timber before the half-sleeping mind understands why. The darkness is not complete. A covered lamp or sheltered light gives just enough glow to turn faces into tired planes and rope into darker rope. Open flame is treated carefully here, because a wooden ship filled with tarred cordage, sailcloth, dried goods and human foolishness does not need encouragement. The light wavers with the ship's motion. It shows the shine of water in grooves and the dull swelling of sacks that have taken damp. Your breathing slows because there is nothing else to do. The cold is still present, but it has changed its method. On deck, it attacked. Here, it seeps. The wet hem at your ankle cools. The back of your neck warms under the hood, then chills where the cloth touches skin. The barrel beside you holds no heat, but it blocks a little air. You give it credit for that. A barrel cannot be a friend. Tonight it can be a wall. A man nearby coughs into his sleeve and turns his face away from the rest. Not from delicacy exactly, but because shared air below deck is already doing enough damage. Crowding can preserve warmth, and crowding can make every breath feel previously owned. Men sleep near one another because separation costs heat and space. They curse one another for the same reason. Human beings are marvellous at needing the thing they resent. You draw your knees up and tuck your hands between them. The rope pattern from earlier still marks your palm. Somewhere under the cargo, water knocks softly with each roll. The boy with the scoop keeps working, slower now, bucket by bucket. His shoulders make a small rhythm in the dimness. Your head lowers toward your chest. The smell of bilge and tar thickens as your eyes close, and just as sleep begins to take the edges off the room, the bucket passes against your boot, asking silently to be moved along. The bucket handle is slick when it reaches you, and for a moment your fingers refuse to close around it. Then the old instinct returns. Take, lift, pass. The water inside shifts heavily, as if it would like to become your problem forever. You hand it along to the next shadow, and the boy with the scoop lowers his head again to the bilge, patient as a tired dog. Your place beside the barrel is gone the instant you lean too far. A broader man settles into it, with the calm cruelty of someone who saw an opening and respected it. You stare at his shoulder. He does not look back. There is no point making a quarrel. Space below deck has no owner unless a stronger person, a higher-ranked person, or a very determined sleeper is currently occupying it. You have just learned which one you are not. Permission matters more than softness. On a ship like this, sleep is not simply taken when the body demands it. The master, the steersman, the watch leader, the experienced hands, and the needs of the vessel decide who may rest and who must keep moving. Medieval maritime communities often work through strict practical hierarchy, whether on merchant craft, raiding ships, fishing vessels, or warships. The sea may be chaotic, the ship cannot afford to be. Someone gives orders, someone obeys. Someone pretends he did not hear quickly enough and is corrected. You shift toward a coil of rope near the chest, but a boot blocks you. The man attached to it opens one eye, not yours. 2 words, low and flat. You move. His rank may not be written anywhere visible, but it sits around him like an extra cloak. Perhaps he owns a share of the vessel. Perhaps he has sailed farther north than the rest. Perhaps he is simply known to be unpleasant before breakfast, and since breakfast may be several hours and one storm away, nobody tests the matter. A seized ship, a stolen cargo, or a hired raid does not erase the ordinary arithmetic of authority. If anything, it sharpens it. Men who live by force still need rules for ropes, shares, watches, food, and sleep. Pirate crews in the later famous Atlantic Age sometimes develop written articles, but medieval raiding groups are more varied and less neatly documented. They may follow a captain, a merchant backer, a war leader, a kin group, a temporary agreement, or a very persuasive collection of knives. Whatever the arrangement, the cold watches the outcome with interest. You end up near the hatch, which is both good and bad in a balanced way that benefits no one. The air is fresher. The wind finds you more easily. Orders reach you first. Feet also reach you first. A man coming down in haste will plant his boot wherever the darkness offers him hope, and your thigh is apparently full of hope. The place itself is a narrow patch between a chest and a bundle of rolled sailcloth. The sailcloth could be softer if it were not damp, stiff, and claimed by 3 other bodies. You sit with your back angled against the chest. Its iron fitting presses through your cloak. The chest belongs to someone above your comfort level. That means you may lean against it lightly, but not shift it, not open it, not place your wet hem over the lid, and absolutely not drool on it in your sleep. Civilization has limits. Sleeping order follows usefulness. The man who must steer later tries to sleep now. The one who knows a damaged line by feel is allowed a better spot, because losing his hands to numbness would cost everyone. A boy gets shoved toward the draft, then pulled back by someone who remembers he will be needed small and quick in the dark. No one calls it kindness. It is maintenance with a face. There are shares to consider too. In many medieval sea ventures, especially commercial or raiding ones, reward can be divided according to role, investment, rank, or prior agreement. A man with a stake in the ship may claim more than cargo profit. He may claim space, food, warmth, and the right to sleep where the hatch drip does not find him. The social ladder has followed you below deck and is now resting its muddy foot on your cloak. Nobody entirely agrees on whether some medieval outlaw crews at sea were more egalitarian in daily practice than lawful merchant crews, partly because the sources tend to be written by victims, officials, monks, litigants, or later storytellers, not by the cold men arguing over a plank. The evidence likes dramatic crimes better than sleeping arrangements. It tells of raids, tolls, captures, pardons, and complaints. It is less generous about who got the dry side of the rolled sail. A small token passes in the darkness. Not money, exactly. A carved bit of bone or wood, perhaps used in some counting game, perhaps only a charm. Perhaps a marker from a board game scratched into a chest lid during calmer weather. Medieval sailors, like nearly everyone else, find ways to pass time when time becomes a burden. Board games such as Nefertafel in the Norse world, dice games, carved counters, and simple gaming pieces travel easily. This one disappears into a pouch before you can see it well. Even in a storm, people protect tiny pleasures with the seriousness of treasure. The man beside you has wrapped his cloak edge around his head and chest, leaving only his nose exposed. He looks less like a fearsome sea raider and more like a badly stored turnip. You keep that thought inside, because he may be the sort of turnip with a knife. His breathing slows. A wet strand of hair sticks to his cheek. His hand remains around a short line tied to a ring bolt, not because he is working, but because if the ship rolls hard, he will not slide into the chest and wake everyone by becoming furniture. You try to copy him, one hand through a fixed loop, knees close, chin down, cloak pulled over the ears. The body must become compact without becoming trapped. Sleep too loose and you lose heat. Sleep too tangled and you cannot answer a call. The ship requires a form of rest that is half obedience, half ambush. Someone complains that you are breathing on his shoulder. You turn your face an inch. Someone else complains that your elbow is near his ribs. You move the elbow and place it against the iron fitting instead, which solves the social problem by creating a personal one. This is the fine art of shipboard peace, relocating discomfort until no one important objects. The hatch above cracks wider for a moment. A voice drops down, naming men for the next turn on deck. Not you yet. The named men wake with the speed of habit and the bitterness of bodies cheated of heat. One curses softly while finding his shoe. Another pats around for a mitten and discovers it under someone else's hip. There is a brief negotiation, conducted mostly through pulling. The mitten returns to its owner, flattened and warm in a way he did not authorize. Their departure changes everything. Warm bodies leave, drafts enter. Space appears, but not enough to enjoy before colder air settles into it. You slide toward the gap they leave, then stop because an older sailor opens one eye. He does not speak. He simply shifts his knee into the space first. That is a complete legal argument. Your back remains against the chest. The ship rolls and the iron fitting presses again between your shoulder blades. The bucket chain has stopped for now. The bilge sound is lower, less urgent. Above, boots cross the deck, and the wind takes the first shout of the new watch before it can fully become a word. Down here, the men left behind tighten around the stolen warmth, and your eyelids lower as someone's wet cloak edge slides across your wrist and stays there. The wet cloak edge warms against your wrist only because your skin is giving up what little heat it has saved. You leave it there anyway. Borrowed discomfort is still insulation, and the man attached to the cloak is too far into sleep to reclaim it. His breath comes in uneven pulls, shallow when the ship rolls, deeper when the hull steadies for a few heartbeats. Around you, bodies settle into a rough pattern, not peaceful, not arranged, but paused. Then a sound from above breaks the pattern. Not a bell, exactly. On some medieval ships, time at sea may be marked by calls, changes of watch, prayers, stars, sand glasses in later contexts, or simple habits shaped by the night. In this storm, there is no neat clockwork comfort. The watch changes because men cannot safely work forever, because steering arms tire, because ropes need checking, because the sea does not sleep and therefore resents anyone else trying. A boot thuds near the hatch. Someone calls a name, then another. The names are not shouted with ceremony. They are thrown down like tools. A sleeper beside you wakes badly. His whole body jerks before his eyes open, and his hand grips the fixed loop so hard the knuckles pale in the dimness. For a moment he has no idea where he is. Then the smell of bilge, the angle of the chest, and the wind pushing through the hatch return him to himself. He groans once, not loudly. Loud groans invite comment. He unwinds his cloak from his shoulders and loses all its stored warmth in one motion. You feel the change beside you like a small door opening onto winter. Sleep aboard this ship is not a block. It is chopped into pieces too uneven to count. A man may rest for the length of a calmer spell, for the time it takes another watch to haul and steer, for the mercy between one leak and the next. In later naval language, watches become formalized into recognizable patterns, but medieval crews are not always described with the tidy precision a modern reader would like. Still, the logic is plain. Work must continue through the night, and the body must be used in shifts or broken altogether. The man who was called pats at the darkness for his shoe. He finds your ankle instead. You move it. He finds the shoe. Then he searches for a line of cord he uses as a belt, mutters something about thieves, discovers it tied around his own waist, and becomes silent with impressive dignity. Even exhaustion allows room for embarrassment. You try to sink back down, but the interruption has opened the cold inside your clothing. The chest behind you seems harder. The iron fitting has found a more personal part of your shoulder blade. Above, the new watch crosses the deck. Their footsteps travel through the hull, dull and heavy, then sharper near the mast. The ship is a drum nobody meant to build. Every motion above tells on the boards below. A rope slaps. A command follows. The men above answer in short bursts. You picture their hands on the rigging, their shoulders bent to the wind, the new stiffness of knots touched by freezing spray. The picture is not imaginative. It is memory from half an hour ago, already waiting for you again. That is the cruelty of the watch. Even while resting, part of the mind remains on deck, listening for the mistake that will drag the body upright. Academic opinion still shifts around the problem of how consistently medieval northern crews divided night labour on small ships, especially when sources mix legal expectation, saga storytelling, merchant practice, and emergency improvisation. A law or custom may suggest order. A storm may eat the order and leave only whoever can still stand. The question does not trouble you as theory. It lies in your ribs, where the body asks how long it has before the next shout. A small object swings near the hatch, tapping faintly against wood. It may be a charm, a tag, a bit of spare bone, or only a loose fastening made mysterious by darkness. Each roll makes it click twice, pause, click again. The sound begins to braid itself into your drowsiness. Medieval crews carry practical things and believed things together without always separating them neatly. A pendant saint, a carved sign, a lucky scrap from home. A knot tied because an older sailor swore by it. Such items can travel beside knives and needles. Whether they save anyone is a matter for God, luck, and cold men with opinions. Whether they comfort is easier to prove. They remain tied where hands can touch them. Your eyelids close. The deck above thumps, open, close. A wave strikes and water breaks somewhere near the rail, the sound travelling down like a chest being dropped. Open again. This is not the soft border of sleep. It is a gate with a rude guard. Each time you drift, the ship asks a question. Is that cargo moving? Is that water normal? Was that your name? Did the wind change? Did someone fall? Did the steering call? You answer by waking a little, listening, and finding no immediate disaster. Then the gate lets you through for a few breaths. The body learns strange economies. The jaw loosens first. The hands remain ready. The knees stay drawn close. One ear keeps working while the rest of you tries to leave. A man can sleep through another man's snoring, but wake at the wrong creak in a mast support. The older sailors have this talent. Their faces sag into deep rest, yet a change in the ship's motion opens their eyes before yours. Experience is not only knowledge, it is sleep-trained to be suspicious. Somewhere in the hold, the boy with the scoop has finally stopped bailing. His bucket sits between two barrels, not empty, not full enough to demand attention. He curls near it with one arm over the rim, as if guarding a miserable prize. No one moves him. He is small, wet, and useful, and even the hard men can tell when a body has reached the edge of being ordered. Mercy, below deck, sometimes looks like not noticing. The watch above calls again, but not your name. Your shoulders soften by one finger's width. A warm place has formed where your knees meet under the cloak. You protect it carefully. The ship rolls, and your back slides a little along the chest. The iron fitting loses your shoulder and finds the back of your head. You shift lower, muttering into the wool. A terrible arrangement improves into a merely bad one. This is progress. The tapping object near the hatch continues. Plick, plick, pause, click. The rhythm is too irregular to soothe and too small to ignore. You begin to count it anyway, because counting gives the mind a rail to hold. 3 taps. A roll. 2 taps. A footstep above. 1 long scrape of rope. The breath of the man beside you. The bilge water knocking below the boards. Your own pulse in your cold fingers. The next time your eyes close, the ship lurches without striking anything. A deep, sideways lift that presses every sleeper into every other sleeper. No one fully wakes. A few hands tighten. Someone's forehead lands against your sleeve and stays there. You should object. Instead, you let it remain, because the place where his skin meets the wet wool becomes, after a little while, fractionally warmer. The forehead on your sleeve lifts only when a sharper smell reaches the hold. Not smoke, not quite. More like warmed fat, singed crust, and the faint bitter edge of an ember disturbed under ash. Around you, eyes open in pieces. Nobody panics. Panic wastes warmth. But several faces turn toward the same narrow direction, because a wooden ship notices fire the way a sleeping dog notices a stranger at the door. The smell comes from the galley place, if this vessel has anything generous enough to deserve that name, or from a sheltered cooking box and brazier rigged for use when the weather allows. On many medieval ships, cooking arrangements are simple, temporary, and cautious. A hearth ashore can sit in its own corner and behave like a citizen. Fire aboard ship is a guest with criminal tendencies. It warms food, dries fingers, keeps morale from collapsing entirely, and can destroy the whole vessel if someone gets careless for a breath too long. The man beside you whispers a complaint that may be about hunger or arson. It is hard to tell. You shift your head from the chest and peer past the shapes of sleepers. A dull red glow appears and vanishes behind bodies and cargo. Someone has uncovered embers, perhaps to heat a little drink, soften food, or warm hands before another turn outside. The light does not spread far. It clings low, guarded by boards, clay, iron, or whatever the crew trusts tonight. Trust is a large word for a container of coals on a pitching ship. You want to move closer at once. Everyone does. Heat has gravity. It pulls the eyes first, then the hands, then the whole foolish body. The men nearest it form a tight half-circle, not from fellowship but from greed with elbows. One turns his palms toward the glow and then away before the skin can sting. Another holds a strip of damp cloth near the warmth, far enough not to scorch it, close enough to pretend drying is happening. The cloth steams faintly and gives off a smell like wet sheep reconsidering life. Fire is rationed by caution as much as by fuel. A ship carries wood, charcoal, or embers depending on region, vessel, voyage, and purpose. But fuel at sea is never just fuel. It is cargo weight. It is storage. It is risk. It is the difference between warm broth and cold chewing. It is also a spark looking for sailcloth, rope fibre, dry packing, or a neglected wisp of tow. The deck above may be soaked, but below, tucked among stores, there are always things waiting to burn if offered the wrong kindness. A small iron hook hangs near the glow, holding a pot just above the heat. The pot swings slightly with the vessel, each swing corrected by a hand that looks practiced and annoyed. Medieval ship cooking may use cauldrons, pots, griddles, or simple containers set over controlled coals, and evidence from ship finds, iconography, and written references suggests a wide variety rather than one tidy system. The practical aim is not elegance. It is to warm something without converting the hull into a funeral. Experts remain cautious about claiming whether braziers were regularly used in rough weather on many medieval northern ships, because the evidence is scattered and the conditions matter too much for easy rules. A larger vessel, a calmer sea, a sheltered deck, a crew with good equipment, a desperate storm, a shortage of fuel, each changes the answer. A future scholar may hesitate. A cold crew does not hesitate in the same way. It weighs the risk, smells the embers, and moves one hand a little closer. You edge forward when someone else crawls toward the hatch. His departure opens a path no wider than a selfish thought. Your knees slide across damp planking. The warmth reaches your face before the glow fully reaches your eyes. It is not enough to warm the body. It is enough to remind the body that warmth exists, which is almost cruel. Near the coals, an older sailor has placed a few small stones along the edge of the heat, not large enough to damage anything if they roll, or so he hopes. They will take warmth slowly, and release it slowly if wrapped later in cloth. The practice feels clever in the modest way of people who cannot afford waste. A heated stone is not a miracle. It is a delayed argument against cold. One man grumbles that the stones take space meant for food. Another replies that a man with dead toes eats poorly. This is the nearest thing to philosophy you are likely to get tonight. A ladle scrapes the pot. The sound is soft, but every hungry person hears it. The liquid inside is thin, maybe ale warmed with scraps, maybe broth made from fish, fat, or whatever would surrender flavour under heat. Steam rises and disappears into the dark roof of the hold. The first portion goes not to the nearest hand, but to the man due back on deck. This is justice of a practical kind. He will spend the warmth fastest. He receives the cup, wraps both hands around it, and drinks as if trying not to burn his mouth. Nobody warns him. A burned tongue is his own affair. When the cup finally reaches you, the rim is greasy and warm. You do not ask questions. You drink. The liquid tastes of salt, smoke, old metal, and something that may once have belonged to a fish. It is wonderful. Not because it is good, but because it is warm all the way down. Your throat opens. Your chest believes a lie for a moment and thanks you. The glow shows the hold differently. Faces become older. Hands look swollen and red where cold has worried them. The barrel hoops shine. The chest fitting beside your sleeping place glints with the same iron malice as before. On a beam above the coals, someone has tied back a loose thread of sailcloth so it cannot dangle near the heat. That tiny knot may save more lives than a dramatic sword stroke, though no song will bother with it. Songs are very poor at respecting housekeeping. A spark jumps when the cook, or the closest person to that office tonight, shifts a coal. 3 men react at once. One cups a hand to block the draft. One presses the spark dead against the container edge. One says a saint's name with the flat irritation of a man who has already used the saint several times this evening. The spark dies. The silence after it is brief but complete. You understand why warmth is never innocent here. On land, fire gathers people. At sea, fire gathers people and makes them suspicious of one another's sleeves. Every cloak edge becomes a possible wick. Every sleepy hand near the coals becomes an accusation waiting to happen. The men want heat, but they do not trust hunger, drowsiness, or the ship's next roll. So the fire is watched as carefully as weather. Your damp cuff warms enough to release a little steam. You hold it near the glow and then draw it back before anyone can tell you to. A patch of cloth at the wrist softens. The salt remains. The damp remains. But the edge no longer feels like a ring of cold iron. This is a triumph of very small borders. Above, a call comes down. The fire is covered almost immediately, not extinguished, not wasted, but hidden back under ash and guarded heat. The red light shrinks. The men nearest it hold their hands still, as if movement might make the warmth vanish faster. The cup is wiped with a thumb, refilled with barely enough for the next man, and passed upward toward the hatch. Darkness returns in layers. First the barrels lose their shine, then the faces fade, then the chest beside you becomes only pressure again. But a warm line remains inside your chest where the drink has gone, and your right cuff holds a little memory of heat. You crawl back toward your stolen patch near the iron fitting, carrying that warmth like contraband, while behind you someone folds a cloth around one of the small stones and tucks it away before any higher-ranking cold person can claim it. The wrapped stone disappears into someone's clothing, and nobody says anything, which is how theft, fairness, and survival sometimes agree to share a bench. You settle back by the chest with the warm line in your chest fading already. The body is ungrateful. It receives a mouthful of heat and immediately asks what else you have brought. Hunger arrives slowly at first, then all at once. It has been waiting behind cold, fear, work, and the problem of not falling through the hatch. Now that your hands are not hauling rope and the fire has been hidden, the belly speaks with the calm authority of a landlord. Around you, other men begin making the same small movements, touching pouches, reaching under cloaks, feeling along the edge of a chest, checking whether a scrap saved earlier is still where it should be. At sea, food is not just a meal. It is a tool that keeps the body from turning into bad cargo. Someone passes you a piece of hard bread. It is not offered tenderly. It is shoved into your hand as part of a chain of portions, and you close your fingers around it before anyone changes his mind. The bread is dark, dense, and dry enough to challenge the teeth. Ship's bread in medieval Europe can take many forms, from hard-baked loaves to biscuit-like stores meant to last, and sailors depend on grains that can survive travel better than soft, fresh bread. Fresh bread belongs to shore, ovens, and people whose floors are not moving. This piece belongs to endurance. You bite carefully. A careless bite may crack a tooth, and the ship carries no gentle dentist waiting in a clean room with reassuring tools. The bread resists, then breaks into dry corners. You hold one piece in the warm hollow of your mouth and let it soften before chewing. This is not dainty, it is engineering. Saliva becomes a cooking method when everything else has failed. A strip of dried fish follows. It is stiff, salty, and powerful enough to announce itself before it reaches you. Stockfish and other preserved fish are major goods in the medieval North Atlantic economy, especially from northern waters where cod can be dried in cold air and traded widely. That fact sounds grand in a market account. In your hand, it is a pale strip that must be torn with the side teeth and negotiated like leather. It carries salt into every crack in the lips. It also gives strength. You respect it while not liking it very much. The man beside you dips his bread briefly into the last warmth at the bottom of a cup. Not long enough to trick it into softness. He eats with his eyes half closed. Another man has a lump of fat wrapped in cloth, perhaps from pork, seal, fish, or whatever sauce the voyage has allowed. Fat matters in cold weather because the body burns through energy hard when wet, shivering, and working. Medieval sailors do not calculate calories, but they understand that greasy food can put a steadier flame inside a person than watery cheerfulness. The fat is cut with a small knife and passed in pieces no larger than fairness permits. It leaves a shine on fingers. One man licks his thumb and then wipes it on his own sleeve, which is either good manners or the only kind available. The piece you receive is waxy with cold at first. It softens against the tongue. It tastes of salt and storage, and the body accepts it with embarrassing gratitude. A quirky thing happens with the crumbs. Nobody wastes them. A man tilts his palm and catches the broken bits against the fold of his cloak. Another presses crumbs into a mouthful of softened bread. One keeps a scrap in a little pouch, not for later enjoyment exactly, but because a few crumbs can thicken a swallow of broth, bait a hook in calmer water, distract a rat, or quiet the belly for 3 minutes at an inconvenient time. Crumbs have careers at sea. Ale, if there is any, comes thin and sour. Water stored aboard can go stale or foul depending on the vessel, barrels, voyage length and luck, so ale, beer or other weak drinks often serve as safer and more pleasant liquids in many medieval European contexts. On this ship, pleasant has resigned from its position. Still, the drink is not frozen, not seawater, and not imaginary. You take what is given. The cup's rim is shared by too many mouths. You turn it slightly before drinking. As if that solves anything. It makes you feel civilized, which is cheaper than being clean. Modern scholarship still has not quite resolved whether some crews on northern raiding voyages relied mainly on shipboard stores or regularly supplemented them with coastal stops, barter, hunting, fishing and forced taking, because surviving records are uneven and often written after trouble has already happened. A merchant ledger remembers barrels and values. A complaint remembers what was stolen. A saga may remember a feast or a famine, depending on what serves the story. Your stomach only knows that tonight's food is hard, salty, and not enough to waste. Eating below deck requires timing. The ship rolls and the cup must be lowered before it hits someone's knee. A crumb falls into a wet groove and is immediately no longer part of human civilization. A piece of fish skids from one palm, and 3 hands move toward it with the speed of moral flexibility. The original owner wins. He eats it with a look that discourages legal appeal. The food warms less than the work did, but it lasts differently. It gives the body something to do besides shiver. Your jaw moves, your hands hold, your throat swallows. The inner fire is small, but it has fuel now. The cold has to work through bread, fish, fat, ale, and stubbornness. It will, of course. The cold is not easily discouraged. But for a while, the body feels less hollow. Someone tells a short story about a voyage where the bread had worms, and the worms were judged the softer part. It is not a loud story. It is not even very funny. Men smile because the mouth is already working, and because the memory belongs to someone else. Sailors joke about food the way they joke about weather, not because the subject is light, but because complaint needs a shape small enough to hold. A second ration does not come. You wait for it anyway, because hope is a poor accountant. The pouch closes, the knife disappears. The cup moves toward the men due for the colder work above. Fairness again bends toward usefulness. A man who must haul line in the wind receives the last swallow before a man who only wishes to sleep. You dislike this while understanding it completely. The last bite of bread sits at the back of your tongue. You press it against your teeth and let it soften as long as possible. Eating slowly is not refinement here. It stretches the body's belief that more is happening. Your stomach settles, not full, but less sharp. The wrapped stone shifts somewhere in the dark, changing hands perhaps, or being tucked closer against a belly. A man coughs. Another tightens a cord around a food pouch and ties it under his cloak, close enough to notice if fingers try for it. Above, water strikes the deck again, hard enough to send a fine spray down through the hatch. It lands on the back of your hand and on the remaining crumb in your palm. You lift the crumb quickly and eat it before the sea can claim credit. Then the hull tilts, the cup rolls against the chest, and every man still awake turns his head toward the sound of fresh water moving somewhere it should not be moving. Fresh water moving in the wrong place is a phrase the mind understands before the mouth can form it. Not fresh as in clean and useful. Fresh as in newly arrived from above, from outside, from the great cold fist of the weather. The sound comes again, a thin running, then a scattered tapping as droplets strike cargo, board, cloth, and one unlucky man's exposed neck. He wakes with a hiss and claps a hand over the spot. Nobody laughs. A drip on the neck is too small for pity and too familiar for comedy. The men nearest the sound shift toward it, not quickly enough to look alarmed, but too quickly to be casual. A leak is not always disaster. On a wooden ship in a freezing storm, it is more like a question. Where is it coming from? How much is it bringing? What is it wetting? Can it wait? And the most important question, always, who has to leave warmth to deal with it? A cloth is shoved upward toward the seam where water finds its way down from the hatch edge or a gap in the deck planking. The first attempt fails. The cloth falls back wetter than before and lands across a man's knee. He peels it off with the expression of someone receiving a letter from an enemy. Another man reaches higher, fingers pressing the cloth into place while the ship rolls. For a moment it holds. Then the water creeps around the edge and continues, less proudly perhaps, but still present. Water is the cold's favourite servant. Air alone can be endured for a while. Wet cloth, wet bedding, wet rope, wet shoes, wet food sacks, wet wood under the hip. These are how the cold finds patience. Medieval sailors may not write treatises about evaporative cooling, but they build whole habits around avoiding soaked layers, protecting stores, and keeping working gear from becoming useless. A rope left in the wrong wet place can stiffen. A sail can grow heavy. A cloak can stop being clothing and begin auditioning as seaweed. The leak has chosen a sack, which is considered rude because sacks are rarely improved by weather. Two men drag it away from the drip. The sack leaves a dark smear on the plank. Grain, flour, meal, or dried goods can spoil if soaked, and even if the cargo is not food, dampness can ruin value. Wool can be traded wet only by people determined to quarrel. Hides can rot. Salted goods can leak brine into places where brine is not invited. At sea, wetness is not a condition. It is an accountant with bad news. You reach for the bucket still near the chest and set it under the worst drip. The bucket rocks as the ship rolls, and the first falling drops miss it entirely. You shift it 1/2 inch. Now they strike the rim. Another 1/2 inch. At last they land inside with a hollow wooden plonk, each one deeply pleased with itself. There, you have defeated the sea with furniture, temporarily. Peculiar little tool appears from someone's pouch, a wedge of wood wrapped with fibre, perhaps meant to be driven into a small gap or used to press caulking where a seam complains. Ship maintenance in the medieval world relies on carpenter's knowledge, tar, moss, or animal hair in some caulking traditions, wooden plugs, wedges, and an endless supply of attention. The exact materials vary by region and vessel. The principle does not. Stop the water where you can. Chase what you cannot stop. Pretend this is normal until it becomes normal. The man with the wedge crawls toward the forward boards. He taps with the butt of a knife, not hard. He listens through his fingers, then presses the wrapped piece into a narrow place and leans his weight on it. Another hand passes him tarred fibre. The smell rises at once, sharp and familiar. Tar in a warm yard is one thing. Tar in a cold hold at night, handled by numb fingers while a bucket catches stormwater, has less romance and more honesty. Archaeologists and historians do not entirely agree on whether all the leak-stopping methods described or inferred from later and better documented seafaring can be safely applied to smaller medieval northern vessels in rough Arctic conditions. Some hull finds preserve tool marks, caulking traces, fastenings, and repair evidence. Written sources mention ships being readied, repaired, tarred, and bailed, but the exact midnight repair, the one done by a crouching man with a wet sleeve and no patience, usually escapes the record. You watch it happen anyway, because the ship either stays afloat in particulars or not at all. A frozen rope is hauled down from near the hatch and dropped beside the chest with a thud. It is stiffened in a curve, like a dead snake with professional training. Someone curses it, bends it slowly, and knocks ice from the fibres. The ice breaks in dull grains, not pretty crystals. It scatters across the planks and melts where bodies have made the air warmer. Frozen rope is dangerous not because it looks dramatic, but because it stops obeying quickly. A knot that cannot be adjusted, a line that will not run, a coil that hides ice in its turns. These can waste time when time is already spending men. Your bedding, such as it is, has not escaped. The upper fold of your cloak is still on your shoulders, but the lower edge has taken water from the plank. You lift it and feel the extra weight. Not much. Enough. The damp creeps upward by contact, fold to fold. You shake it once, then regret the motion because drops strike another man's face. He opens one eye. You lower the cloak slowly. Diplomacy returns. There are no spare dry blankets waiting in a neat locker. Extra cloth exists, but it belongs to sails, cargo, owners, officers, or men who have already hidden it well. If bedding is carried, it may be a cloak, blanket, hide, spare garment, or sack used when needed. In bad weather, the line between bedding and working cloth disappears. The thing that covers you at rest may wrap cargo, block a draft, wipe a hand, support a wounded ankle, or be seized by someone with more authority. Sleep has to compete with every other use for fabric. Another wave strikes. A spray of colder water comes through the hatch, wider this time. Men twist away, pulling food pouches under cloaks. The bucket under the drip jumps and loses half its careful collection across the floor. You stare at it. The bucket has betrayed you, but only because the ship betrayed the bucket first. The repair near the forward boards holds better on the second try. The drip weakens. The sound changes from running to ticking. That matters. A running sound keeps everyone awake. A ticking sound can be folded into sleep if the mind is tired enough and morally flexible. You drag the bucket back, wedge it with a scrap of wood, and press the wet edge of your cloak between your knees, where body heat may do a little work. The cloth is cold enough to make you inhale sharply. Around you, men begin reassembling their rest. The sack has been moved. The rope has been broken free of ice. The wedge sits in place under a hand that waits one more minute to be sure. Above, storm water continues to hunt for entrances. Below, every surface has become slightly more honest about how wet it really is. Your head lowers toward the chest again, but now you keep one hand on the cloak edge, holding it away from the damp plank. The position is uncomfortable, and your wrist will ache. Better that than waking wrapped in water. The bucket gives one small wooden knock as the ship rolls, and the weakened drip lands inside it. Not every time, but often enough for you to trust it a little. Then something soft and heavy slides against your boot. Not a body. Not water. The moved sack has shifted again, its cord loosened by wet and handling, and a thin line of grain or meal begins to spill into the dark groove between the boards. The spilling grain makes a sound so soft it is almost private, a dry whisper under all the wet thudding of the storm. For one foolish second nobody moves, because the sound belongs to ordinary land things, mills, sacks, bins, kitchens, a hand scooping meal for bread. Then the ship rolls, the pale line widens, and everyone understands that food is escaping into the boards. A hand clamps the sack. Another man shoves his palm into the loosened cord and twists it shut. You lean forward and press your fingers along the wet seam where the grain has begun to gather. Some of it sticks to the damp plank. Some has already vanished into the groove. It is not much. It is also too much. On a cold voyage, a handful of meal is not a symbol. It is a mouthful lost, a future broth made thinner, a small argument waiting for daylight. The owner of the sack, or the man who claims responsibility for it tonight, hisses through his teeth. Not loudly. The higher voices are saved for ropes, weather, and insults with witnesses. This is a lower anger, close to the chest. He reties the cord with wet fingers and checks the knot twice. The sack may be cargo, it may be stores, it may be stolen. The ship does not label morality as neatly as a clerk would like. That is one of the secrets of these northern waters. The difference between a pirate and a trader can change with the season, the patron, the law, the coast, and the person writing the complaint. Medieval sea raiding is often tangled with commerce, private revenge, lordly warfare, unpaid debt, toll disputes, and opportunism. A vessel may leave harbour with goods to sell, men to fight, and arguments prepared for both outcomes. On a night like this, the grain does not care whether it was bought, taxed, seized, or recovered. It only needs to stay in the sack. You help gather what can still be saved. Damp meal clings under your nails. A man scrapes it with the edge of a small knife into a wooden cup. Another uses a piece of broken board like a tiny shovel. Nobody says pirate while doing this. The word would sound too grand for cold fingers rescuing paste from a plank. Outlawry may be declared in courts and chronicles. Below deck, it looks like men trying not to lose breakfast. In medieval Scandinavia, the North Atlantic and nearby seas, raiding and trading often overlap in ways modern categories dislike. The same ship technology that carries merchants can carry warriors. The same knowledge of tides, shelters, languages, and coastlines serves peaceful exchange and violent taking. Kings and local rulers sometimes authorize force at sea. Towns complain of piracy when rivals interrupt trade. One man's licensed reprisal becomes another man's robbery before the ink dries. If the ink dries. In weather like this, even parchment would like to go home. The man with the sack has a small lead seal tied to one cord, flattened and scratched, perhaps marking ownership, tax, or some earlier handling of goods. It is not impressive, a dull little thing, cold against the fingers, but seals, tallies, and marked cords travel with trade because memory alone is a poor warehouse. This one has been bent by use. Its mark is hard to read in the dimness. It may prove something later, or be ignored by anyone strong enough to ignore it. Still, he preserves it carefully, as if the seal can defend the sack from accusation, theft, or bad luck. Interpretations continue to differ over whether some famous medieval pirates should be understood mainly as criminals, political actors, private warriors, displaced traders, or simply seamen operating inside a world where maritime law was patchy and power travelled poorly over water. The sources often arrive with a grudge. Monks record raids on churches, merchants record losses, rulers record enemies. Few records preserve the man crouched beside you, licking grain paste from his thumb, because no legal category has ever kept a sailor warm. A quiet quarrel begins over the spilled meal. The responsible man wants the saved scrap returned to his measure. Another argues that what fell became common trouble and should become common food. The argument is ridiculous and entirely serious. Shares aboard a raiding or trading vessel can be delicate. Men may be owed portions of cargo, wages, prize goods, rations, or favours promised before the voyage. A handful of meal can stand near the edge of those promises. Hunger makes accountants of everyone. The older sailor settles it without ceremony. He takes the cup of damp grain, divides it with 2 fingers, and sends the larger part back to the sackman, the smaller part toward the cooking place for the next thin pot. Both sides dislike the decision just enough for it to be fair. This is leadership at sea, not glory, not speeches, but preventing a fight over wet flour while the vessel tries to shake you all into the bilge. Above, the watch shouts at something beyond the rail. A light? A wave? A coast? No one below can tell. Heads lift. For a moment the air tightens around a different kind of fear. Other ships in these waters are opportunities, threats, witnesses, victims, rescuers, rivals, or future lawsuits. A sail glimpsed at dawn may mean trade, warning, battle, or news. In a storm-dark night, unseen company is worse, because imagination supplies better teeth. No second shout follows. The men lower their heads again by degrees. The sack is wedged between 2 barrels and braced with a coil. Your palm remains sticky with grain paste. You wipe it on the inside of your cloak where the mark will be hidden, then regret wasting even that. The smell of wet meal mingles with fish, tar, and bilge, making the hold briefly resemble a bakery run by enemies. A man near the hatch mutters that honest merchants sleep better. Someone else answers that honest merchants are ashore, and therefore cheating. The joke is small, tired, and probably unfair. It helps anyway. At sea, Moral superiority is easier to maintain from a warm bed. Here, nobody has a warm bed, and superiority must wait its turn. You settle back with the others, the repaired sack now pressed against your shin like a reminder. The ship carries law and lawlessness in the same dark belly. Marked goods, stolen goods, owed goods, shared food, private knives, public orders, prayers, grudges, and men who may swear innocence loudly if they reach harbour. Your body does not sort them. It sorts warmth, hunger, sleep, and the next call from above. The grain under your nails dries into a rough edge. You pick at it with your thumb until the nail hurts. The bucket ticks, the repaired drip holds, the chest bites your back in the old place. Above, the storm pushes the ship farther through the dark, and somewhere beyond the hull there may be coast, ice, another vessel, or nothing but black water taking no interest in anyone's legal position. The black water outside keeps its opinions to itself. That is almost worse. When the sea is loud, it gives the mind something to blame. When the hull rides through a dark stretch between heavier blows, every man below listens too hard. The bucket ticks. The sailcloth creaks. The grain sack rests against your shin. Somewhere above, a foot scrapes, then stills, and in that short stillness the whole ship seems to be waiting for the sky to decide. A low voice near the hatch begins a prayer. Not a grand one, no choir, no polished Latin rolling under a church roof, no candlelit altar safely planted on stone. Just a man speaking into his own damp cloak, asking for help in words worn smooth by use. Another voice answers with a phrase. Someone else makes the sign of the cross in the dark and bumps his knuckles against a barrel doing it. Religion at sea is not an ornament. It is part of the working equipment, carried beside knives, needles, food, and rope. Many medieval sailors call on saints for protection, and St. Nicholas is especially associated with sailors in much of medieval Europe. Churches in ports honour him, images of him travel, and his name can be spoken quickly when the sea rises faster than courage. The fact sits differently here than it does in a church calendar. In the hold, a saint is not a distant decoration. He is someone you hope has noticed this particular bad night, this particular poor vessel, and your particular feet, which would like to remain attached. A small pendant passes into view when a man pulls it from inside his tunic. It may be a saint's token, a cross, a bit of bone or metal, or something believed to have touched something holy. The glow from the covered coals is gone, so the object is mostly shape and habit. He presses it to his lips, then tucks it away before the next roll can swing it loose. Nobody mocks him. Mockery is easier in daylight, on land, after surviving. Beside your knee, an older sailor works at a knot in a cord. Not ship's work. This is smaller, private, done with stiff fingers close to the chest. There are old stories in northern Europe and around the wider seafaring world about winds tied in knots, weather bought from strange cellars, storms called or released, and sailors trusting, fearing, or laughing at such things depending on need and temperament. It would be foolish to pretend every man believes the same. It would be equally foolish to say belief disappears just because hands are practical. A sailor can know how to trim a sail and still dislike a bad omen. The cord disappears when he sees you looking. Fair enough. At sea, a private charm is like a private Russian. A person may admit it exists only after it has worked. The written sources leave room for disagreement about how seriously working crews treated charms, omens, and weather magic in everyday practice, as opposed to how church writers, legal authorities, and later storytellers wanted to describe them. Some condemn superstition, some repeat marvels, some preserve sailor lore in shapes already polished by entertainment or warning. The evidence never quite lets you sit inside an ordinary crewman's head. It only gives you his wet sleeves, his prayer, his knot, and the way he stops speaking when the ship makes a new sound. A wave hits hard enough to throw a sleeping man's shoulder into the grain sack. The sack holds. The man wakes, says the name of God once, and checks whether anything has broken. That order matters. First the holy name, then the cargo. Medieval priorities are often more mixed than tidy explanations allow. Above, the watch calls down that the wind has shifted. The words arrive broken, but the effect is immediate. Men adjust themselves even before an order follows. A wind shift can save or punish. It can ease the pressure on a sail or throw the ship into uglier water. It can move ice. It can hide a coastline. It can turn a known course into guesswork. Nobody below needs a lecture on meteorology. The ship's angle tells enough. You climb halfway toward the hatch, not because you are cold yet, but because bodies make room badly unless someone helps. The air near the opening is colder, full of spray and torn voices. Above, the sky is a low black weight. No stars, no moon visible. Medieval navigation in northern waters can use landmarks, sounding, sun, stars, wind, swell, birds, and hard-earned coastal memory, but a storm can take away half the world's signs and make the rest untrustworthy. A compass exists in medieval Europe by the later Middle Ages, but not every vessel, voyage or crew depends on one in the same way, and even a compass does not make a freezing deck pleasant. It only tells you the direction in which misery is happening. Someone mutters about an unlucky word spoken earlier. Another tells him to save his breath for hauling. Both may be right. Words matter aboard ship, but rope matters with less ambiguity. A gull's cry, a sudden silence, a strange light on water, a dream before departure, a woman's warning at the quay, a priest's blessing, a coin dropped wrong side down. Such things can gather meaning once the storm begins. The mind hates empty danger. It would rather have a sign, even a bad one, than nothing to hold. A little lump wrapped in cloth is nailed or tied near the mastfoot, just visible when the hatch opens wider. Perhaps a relic, perhaps a charm bundle, perhaps only repair material placed where it will not be lost. You cannot tell. That uncertainty is part of its power. If it is holy, you should respect it. If it is useful, you should not move it. If it is someone else's private safeguard, touching it may start a quarrel worse than ignorance. You leave it alone. This is a good rule for many things at sea. The man with the pendant begins another prayer when the ship plunges. This time, more voices join, not in unison, but in overlapping pieces. Latin from one mouth, a vernacular plea from another. A saint named, then Christ, then Mary, then a promise offered with the slippery optimism of frightened men. Promises made in storms must crowd heaven like gulls behind a fishing boat. If every sailor kept every vow made between one wave and the next, the churches of Europe would be roofed in oars. The thought almost makes you smile, but the ship drops and your teeth close on the inside of your cheek. The smile becomes a quiet hiss. Practical correction from the sea. Prayer does not remove work. The called men go up. The line must be checked. The steering must answer the new wind. The sail must not take too much strain. The men who remain below shift around the opening to pass what is needed. A coil, a wooden pin, a spare wrap. The sacred and the practical share the same cramped path through the hatch. One hand sends up rope, another touches across, another holds the bucket out of the way with a foot. You settle back, only when the order above becomes steady rather than urgent. The pendant is hidden again. The little cord knot stays in its owner's fist. Your own hand finds nothing holy, only the rough edge of dried grain under your nail and the damp fold of cloak at your wrist. Still, you press your thumb against the grain as if it were a bead and count the bucket ticks for a while. Tick, roll, breath, rope above, tick, a muttered saint's name. The hull lifts under you, not kindly, not cruelly, just carrying everyone farther through the dark while belief and seamanship sit shoulder to shoulder, both awake, both needed. Both awake, both needed, and neither able to make your fingers work properly when the next task arrives. A spare wrap is requested from below, then another. Someone above has fumbled a fastening, or a line has iced, or a hand has become too clumsy to trust. The order comes down in pieces. Cloth, knife, warm hands if there are any. The last phrase is not a joke, but the hold receives it like one because nobody here is in possession of such a luxury. You push yourself upright with the stiffness of a man much older than you were yesterday. The dried grain under your nail cracks. Your knees complain before your mouth can. Near the hatch, a sailor sits with both hands tucked under his armpits, rocking slightly from heel to heel. His face is grey with fatigue and cold, and his lower lip trembles in a way he is trying to hide. Pride survives in strange corners. It cannot stop the shaking, so it pretends the shaking is voluntary. Cold does not always arrive as dramatic collapse. More often it turns useful people into poor versions of themselves. Fingers lose their cleverness, wrists slow, feet stumble, speech thickens. A knot that would take 3 breaths in daylight takes a dozen in the dark. Medieval sailors, soldiers, fishers and travellers in northern climates know these signs without modern terms. They know when a man must be warmed, fed, slapped awake, given work, or kept from pretending he can still do something dangerous. Pride can freeze faster than water, and it is harder to thaw. You take a strip of cloth from a pouch, not dry, but less wet than the rest of the world. It is passed upward. A moment later, a hand reaches down for another. The hatch frame is slick beneath your palm. You climb only high enough to see the deck. The wind hits your eyes and makes them water at once. Above, 2 men crouch over a rope stiff with ice. One holds it while the other tries to work the knot open with fingers that no longer bend well. A knife handle strikes the knot. The blade stays sheathed. Cutting a line is a serious confession. No one wants to make it unless the ship leaves no choice. The man working the knot has hands red at the joints and pale along the fingers. Chilblains, frostnip, cracked skin and numb fingers are not rare companions in cold maritime life, though the words and diagnoses shift across time and language. What matters here is function. Can the hand grip? Can it feel rope? Can it obey before the next wave? The body may be suffering quietly, but the ship asks only whether the work gets done. The knot loosens at last. Not beautifully, it yields one ugly fraction, then another. Someone breathes out hard. You pass up the second cloth. The man wraps it around his fingers for a few moments, not as a bandage, but as a way of holding a little warmth against the joints. Another sailor rubs his hands briskly, then stops because rubbing cracked skin can open it worse. He presses his palms together instead, as if in prayer, though his eyes are on the rope, not heaven. Below, a cough moves through the hold. One man begins, another answers, then a third tries not to, and fails. Cold air, damp clothing, smoke from covered embers, crowded sleeping, and ordinary infections travel easily in cramped spaces. Medieval ships do not need plague to make men ill. A chest cough in winter weather can become the background music of a voyage. No one wants to sleep beside it. Everyone ends up sleeping beside it eventually. A small leather pouch is opened near the chest. Inside are scraps of something sharp-smelling. Maybe dried horehound, maybe onion, garlic, or another household remedy carried because someone's mother, wife, sister, or old shipmate insisted it helped. Medieval medicine blends learned theory, household practice, prayer, plant knowledge, and local habit in ways that do not fit neatly into modern categories. A man chews the scrap with a grim expression. Whether it cures him is uncertain. It certainly gives his breath authority. The material record complicates the question of how much medical care medieval crews could expect aboard small vessels in northern waters. Larger ships, military expeditions, pilgrim traffic, and royal or urban contexts might include people with specific healing knowledge or better supplies. A rough raiding or trading crew may have only household remedies, experience, a few tools, prayer, and the unpleasant confidence of men who have seen injuries before. The sources mention wounds and sickness more readily than the quiet care between them. A warmed cup, a shared cloth, a hand checking whether another hand has gone dangerously cold. You lower yourself back into the hold, and the change in air makes your face sting. The man with the cough is now wrapped in someone else's cloak at the shoulders. He objects weakly. The owner tells him to shut up before he wastes the heat. That is tenderness with barnacles on it, but tenderness all the same. The coffer draws his knees up and presses his face into the borrowed wool. Near the bucket, the boy who had bailed water earlier is awake again, though no one called him. He is picking at his fingers where the skin has split near the nails. Someone smears a little grease over the cracks, not gently, efficiently. Grease can help protect skin from wet and cold, though too much leaves everything slippery. The boy watches the work as if the fingers belong to someone else. Then he tucks both hands into the folds under his arms and lowers his chin. You inspect your own hands because his have made you think of them. The palms are scored by rope. The fingertips are wrinkled from wet. One knuckle has opened in a small line, too clean to be impressive, too painful to ignore. You press it against the inside of your cloak, where the cloth is warmer. The sting fades, then returns with interest. Very well. The body is keeping accounts too. A man near the hatch has gone too quiet. Not asleep. Quiet in the wrong way, sitting with his head tipped forward and hands loose. The older sailor notices before anyone else. He leans across and taps the man's cheek, once, twice. The head lifts slowly. A cup is pushed into his hands. Someone loosens the wet fold at his neck. Someone else curses him for trying to become useless. The insult lands softly because the cup is warm. This is how alarm disguises itself among tired men. The cold work above steadies. The rope is free. The cloth wraps are returned, wetter than before, of course. Everything loaned to the storm comes back worse. You take one strip and tuck it under your belt where body heat may restore it a little. The coffer breathes in rough pulls. The boy's shoulders settle. The too quiet man drinks and blinks as if each blink must be negotiated. No one announces that the danger has passed. It has not. It has merely changed seats. Your fingers throb with the slow return of blood. The knuckle stings under the cloak. The grain sack presses your shin. Above, boots resume their pattern, and the ship climbs another unseen wave, while every hand below, cracked, numb, wrapped, greased, or hidden, waits to be useful again. Useful again becomes a smaller ambition as the black above the hatch begins to lose its thickness. Not daylight yet. Not rescue. Only a dull paling, as if someone has rubbed ash into the sky and called it morning. The storm still moves around the ship, but its anger has changed shape. The blows come farther apart. The wind no longer tears every word to pieces. Water still comes aboard, yet not with the same wild confidence. Even the bucket sounds less frantic, ticking at a slower, meaner pace. No one celebrates. Morning after a storm is not a gift wrapped cleanly. It is an inventory. The first men up through the hatch carry the night on their backs. Cloaks hang heavy, sleeves drip, faces look scraped by wind. You climb after them because the hold has become too cramped with waiting, and because someone above wants hands, any hands, to begin putting the ship back into a shape that can keep going. Your boots meet the deck, and the cold planks answer through the soles. The sky is low and colourless. The sea is ridged with broken grey. The world looks unfinished. The mast still stands. That is the first fact everyone reads. The sail is damaged but not gone. Lines remain, though some are iced into curves, and some have twisted badly in the dark. The steering gear has held. Barrels and cargo have shifted, but not fatally. A low rail has a splintered place where something struck or tore loose. The ship is alive in the practical sense. She floats, answers, and complains. Medieval seafarers judge survival through such details. A vessel is not safe because the sun rises. It is safe when the hull is sound enough, the rigging workable enough, the cargo still lashed enough, the crew awake enough, and the water inside less than the men can remove. A ship after weather must be checked by hand and eye. No tidy instrument panel explains what the night has done. The inspection is rope, plank, knot, seam, sail, body, bucket. You begin with the ropes. Frozen lines have to be bent, knocked, loosened, and recoiled before they become traps. A rope left wrong may freeze again in the wrong shape. A coil with ice hidden inside may cut fingers or fail to run when needed. You lift one length with both hands, feeling its weight drag through your shoulders. The fibers are stiff, salt-crusted, and rough. When you strike it against the deck, small white grains scatter and vanish into wet wood. A man beside you works without speaking, except to hiss when a cracked knuckle opens again. His breath no longer blows sideways. That alone feels almost luxurious. He flexes the rope, listens to it, rubs a section between thumb and palm, then nods once. Rope has moods. Today this one is sulking but usable. The sail is worse. Wet canvas or woolen sailcloth, depending on vessel and region, becomes heavy enough to alter labour itself. Medieval sails in northern Europe are often made from wool or linen, and woolen sailcloth, when soaked, can weigh brutally. Men gather the edge and try to shake out water and ice. The sail does not shake so much as resent being handled. It slaps against a shoulder with a sound like a door closing badly. A quirky little repair begins near a torn seam. Someone brings a needle thick enough to frighten ordinary cloth, and a palm guard or scrap of leather to help drive it. Sail repair is not delicate embroidery. It is pushing stubborn thread through stubborn material while the ship moves under you. The man sewing holds the needle between fingers red from cold and uses the heel of his hand against the leather. Each stitch is slow, each one matters. A torn sail can grow worse if left to flap. So the morning becomes a sewing room with worse furniture. Historians still argue whether some surviving medieval sail fragments and later sail-making traditions can be used to reconstruct everyday repair practice on smaller raiding craft with confidence. Finds from places like northern European ship contexts give cloth, seams, and construction clues, but a repair made after an Arctic storm may leave no trace except a future patch, if the sail survives at all. The record preserves the grand shape of ships better than the irritated patience of a half-frozen man forcing thread through wet fabric. Cargo comes next. The grain sack is checked and retied. Barrels are sounded by knock and touch. A cask that leaked during the night receives attention from 3 men, who all disagree about the best fix, and all perform the same fix anyway. Wooden hoops are examined. Lashings are tightened. A bundle of hides is dragged away from a damp corner, leaving a dark mark on the deck. Someone finds the lost wooden bowl from the hold. It has acquired a crack and no respect. The crew is counted without ceremony. Not one grand roll call, but glances, names tossed from one man to another, small confirmations. Where is the boy? There, by the rope. Where is the coughing man? Below, breathing. Where is the one who worked the steering? Asleep against the cargo and not to be disturbed unless the mast falls or heaven files a complaint. This is how bodies are accounted for when everyone is tired, by usefulness, location, and the relief of not finding an absence. You take a cup of cold ale and wish it were warm. It is not. The last warmth of the night has gone into bodies, stones, embers, and memory. The sky lightens a fraction. It does not become friendly. The horizon remains hidden by rough water and low cloud. Morning has arrived without comfort, which feels rude but historically consistent. A gull appears, or perhaps some northern bird riding the weather, only a pale movement off the side. Several men look toward it. Birds can mean land, fishing grounds, weather shifts, or simply birds with their own business. The interpretation is immediate and contradictory. One man says land cannot be far. Another says the bird is lost. A third says nothing because silence cannot be proven wrong. The ship continues. Your hands work at a line near the rail. The knuckle split stings with every pull. Damp wool at your wrist has dried slightly where body heat held it through the night, but the outer sleeve is still heavy. You do not feel rescued by dawn. You feel inspected by it. The morning shows what darkness politely concealed. Salt crust on clothing, swollen fingers, a bruise along one cheek, pale lips, a smear of meal on the chest lid, tar on a sleeve, and the small grey exhaustion in every face. Yet the work has a steadiness the night did not. Fear has fewer places to hide in daylight. Problems become visible. Visible problems are still problems, but they can be tied, patched, bailed, counted, cursed, and sometimes repaired. You bend over the rope again. A senior sailor points with 2 fingers. Not that way. Under, then around. You correct the coil. He gives no praise. The absence of correction is your reward. Below, someone begins bailing again, slower now, not from panic but from duty. Above, the stitched sail edge lifts in the wind and holds. The ship turns a little with the grey sea. No harbour appears. No rescue boat comes shouldering through the weather with blankets and a cheerful understanding of your suffering. The day is only the next set of tasks laid over the same cold boards. You draw the rope into its place and tuck the end so it will not trip a half-asleep man later. The word later rests there, plain and heavy. There will be later. That is what the morning gives, not comfort, not certainty, but continuation. Your stomach is emptying again. Your hands hurt. The deck needs clearing. The sail needs watching. The cargo needs one more check, and the ship, having survived the night, immediately begins asking for the rest of your strength. The rest of your strength is not much, but it answers anyway. It answers because the rope lies wrong, because the sail edge must be watched, because a wet bundle has to be shifted before it ruins what is inside, because the body on a ship learns to move before it has finished objecting. You bend, lift, brace, and breathe through your teeth while the morning works slowly across the water. Warmth, when it returns, does not return as a grand comfort. It comes in scraps so small that a person ashore might miss them. A patch of sleeve drying where the wind cannot reach. A cup held between 2 palms after someone finds enough covered heat to take the chill off it. A shoulder pressed against yours while men haul together. A place behind stacked cargo where the air moves less. A dry strip of cloth tucked against the neck like treasure. The ship has no kindness of its own. Every kindness aboard has to be made by hand. A senior sailor sends you below with 2 others to shift the damp sailcloth away from a leaking patch and bring up whatever can still pass for dry covering. The hold has changed in the grey light. It is still cramped, still sour, still wet in all the places that matter, but the edges of objects have returned. The chest is a chest again, not merely an iron bite in the dark. The grain sack bears its new knot. The bucket sits with a little water inside, calm now, as if it has never caused anyone trouble in its life. You kneel near the cargo and sort cloth by touch. Wet. Wetter. Wet but useful. Damp on one side only, which counts as a blessing if described by someone with low standards. Medieval sailors often use ordinary cloaks, spare garments, sacks, hides, and sailcloth for warmth and shelter, because specialised shipboard bedding is limited and unevenly documented. A cloak is clothing, blanket, pillow, draft screen, privacy wall, bundle wrap, and sometimes argument. Nothing aboard gets to have one job. You find a folded piece of wool wedged under a coil, protected less by planning than by accident. Its inner fold is not dry exactly, but it is dry enough to make everyone stare at it with open desire. The older man takes it, sniffs it, checks for mould, then cuts the air with 2 fingers. Not for you alone. Shared. Of course. Private luxury is dangerous when 20 cold eyes can see it. The piece is spread near the least wet place below, not as a bed, but as a warming station for hands, a wrap for the coughing man, and later, perhaps a cover for the boy whose split fingers are tucked under his arms again. The cloth's value comes from rotation. One man warms under it briefly, then another. Too long, and complaint begins. Too little, and the mercy is wasted. Even comfort needs management. A peculiar little treasure appears from a pouch. A tiny lump of beeswax wrapped in linen, kept soft by being carried close to the body. One sailor rubs it along a cracked seam in his shoe, and then along a thread used to mend a torn cuff. Waxed thread passes more easily through stubborn cloth and resists damp better than bare fibre. It is a small, homely trick, almost laughable beside the size of the sea. Yet the cuff closes. The shoe seam takes a little help. The hand that holds the wax guards it like coin. Even now, opinion is not fully settled on whether crews like this carried systematic repair kits in ways later sailors would recognise, or whether most mending depended on whatever needles, awls, wax, scraps and personal habits individual men happen to bring. Ship finds show tools, household records show sewing and repair everywhere. Maritime accounts mention maintenance because ships constantly demand it. But the exact pouch in the exact storm belongs to the kind of history that rarely writes its own name. You know it by the wax under the nail and the thread pulled through damp wool. The coughing man receives the shared cloth around his shoulders. He tries to refuse again because pride has apparently survived the storm in better condition than his lungs. The older sailor ignores him and tucks the edge under his arm. That ends the debate. Warmth given by authority is harder to reject. The coffer lowers his head. His breathing remains rough, but the shivering eases by a little. A little is enough to change the room. Above, the sail repair holds for now. The deck needs clearing. The water inside needs watching. The ship keeps travelling, and with travel comes the old narrow hope of a sheltered inlet, a friendly shore, a strand where a fire may be made without fear of burning the world from under your feet. No one speaks of it too warmly. Hope spoken too loudly can embarrass everyone if the coast stays hidden. So men talk instead of rope, food, lashings, wind, and the miserable state of one man's shoe. You return to the deck with the repaired cuff stiff at your wrist. The air is still cold, but no longer seems designed solely for your destruction. The storm has left behind a disorderly sea and a ship full of work. You take your place near the rail, and the man beside you shifts just enough to block some wind with his shoulder. He does not look at you. You do not thank him. The body receives the shelter anyway. This is how men sleep without freezing to death when they manage it. Not because the ship is warm, not because they are tougher in some storybook way. They survive by layering wool and linen, by keeping cloth out of water when possible, by eating fat and hard bread, by working at the right moments and resting in broken ones, by sharing heat without turning it into sentiment, by knowing which rope sound is ordinary and which one requires waking, by guarding embers, by mending small failures before they become large ones, by making the body narrow behind cargo and calling that sleep. The small mercy is never one thing. It is the dry fold inside a cloak. It is the cup passed to the man going back on watch. It is a warmed stone hidden for a sick boy and then quietly surrendered when someone needs it more. It is the habit of not sitting on another man's line. It is knowing how to wedge a bucket so it catches more drip than floor. It is the old sailor who does not praise you, but corrects the coil before it can trip you later. The sun, still hidden, brightens the cloud from behind. The sea does not soften, but the boards under your boots lose their black shine and become plain, wet wood. Plainness helps. A thing seen clearly can be handled. You flex your fingers. They hurt, which means they are still yours. The rope in your hand is heavy, which means it is still attached. The ship moves forward, which means the night has failed to stop her. You stand among men who smell of salt, tar, fish, smoke, damp wool, and stubborn life. No one looks like a legend. No one looks comfortable. The pirate, the trader, the hired fighter, the runaway, the boy, the old hand, the man with the pendant, the man with the wax, the coffer under the shared cloth. All of them are held for this moment inside the same cold wooden shell. Rank remains, quarrels remain, hunger returns, but so does skill. A final line is made fast. The older sailor tests it, then gives you the smallest nod. Not praise, not affection, a sign that the knot will do. You take your hand away slowly, leaving the rope where it belongs. Behind you, someone below shifts the shared cloth over another pair of shoulders, and the warmth moves on, passed from body to body, while the ship keeps her course through the grey. And now the worst of the night has loosened its grip. The ship still creaks beneath you, but the sound no longer asks for panic. It is only wood remembering pressure. The rope lies where it has been set. The bucket waits in its corner. The repaired sail holds its tired shape against the morning wind. Nothing is perfect. Nothing needs to be perfect. It only needs to hold for a little while longer. Your hands rest inside the folds of your cloak. The cloth is not fully dry, but it is warmer than it was. Your feet ache inside the leather shoes. Your shoulders remember every pull of the rope. Around you, the crew moves more slowly now, not because the work is finished, but because the ship has entered that quieter hour after fear, when even hard men speak with less edge. The sea keeps lifting and lowering the hull, up and down, up and down. The motion is still rough, but the body has learned its shape. Breath follows it without being asked. The cold remains outside the cloth, outside the ribs, outside the small guarded places where warmth has been saved. You do not need to solve the whole voyage now. You do not need the harbour yet. You do not need a dry bed, a bright fire, or a clean room. For this moment, there is only the next breath, the next shift of weight, the next small patch of shelter made by wood, wool, shoulder, and habit. The storm has spent itself for now. The men grow quiet. The ship carries them onward. And you let your head lower, just slightly, into the rough comfort that remains.